In the early 2000s, the Charlie's Angels franchise was riding high. With the success of the 2000 film reboot and its sequel, Full Throttle, in 2003, the Angels had re established themselves as cultural icons, at least for a short time at least. It was no surprise that a video game tie in followed soon after. Released in 2003 for the PlayStation 2, Charlie's Angels, also available on GameCube, attempted to capture the charm, action, and allure of the film franchise. However, what players got was an infamous misstep that has gone down in history as one of the worst games of its generation. The development of Charlie's Angels for the PS2 was handled by Nico Entertainment, a lesser known French studio that didn't have much in the way of pedigree for blockbuster games. The game was published by Ubisoft, a company that by 2003 was still growing its presence globally, but had already garnered significant respect with the likes of Splinter Cell and Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. Given the developer's relative obscurity and Ubisoft's reputation for quality, expectations weren't high, but surely many thought this could still be a passable action venture. The game was released in North America on July the 8th, 2003, around the time the Full Throttle movie was dominating box offices. In Europe, it followed shortly after. There were hopes that this would be a fun, a bit light tie-in to capitalize on the film's success. Instead, Charlie's Angels became a case study in how not to adapt a movie into a video game. Charlie's Angels quickly became notorious in the gaming community for its poor design choices, frustrating gameplay, and abysmal technical execution. Though many tie-in games to films were forgettable and downright bad, this one stood out for its spectacular failures. The game wasn't just mediocre, it was aggressively bad, and yet, in some strange way, endearing. One of the key reasons for the game's reputation is its horribly clunky and inconsistent camera. Throughout the game, the camera has an almost mischievous quality, as if it were deliberately working against the player. At times, it swings wildly around the scene, making it difficult to keep track of the action or the player's character. Other times, it refuses to follow at all, leaving you staring at a wall or a piece of the environment while the fight takes place off screen. The camera feels less like a tool and more like an obstacle, creating frustration at every turn. But it doesn't stop there. The combat is perhaps one of the most damning aspects of the game. The player can switch between three of the iconic angels, Natalie, Dylan, and Alex, each of whom have a slightly different fighting style. However, all of them are hampered by the same flaw: combat that is both repetitive and broken. The moves the angels perform are sluggish, and the animations are so poorly executed that it's difficult to discern when or if your attacks are landing. The hit detection is often completely off, meaning you'll frequently kick or punch at air, even if you're standing right in front of an enemy. To make things worse, the enemy variety is practically non-existent, with players fighting the same generic thugs over and over again. This exacerbates the repetitiveness of the combat. You'll find yourself cycling through the same dull combos, which offer no satisfaction or sense of impact, and after a while, you might start wondering if you're even making progress. Despite the abysmal combat and clunky camera, one of the more curious aspects of Charlie's Angels is that its environments are surprisingly well detailed. Whether it's a beach, a city street, or a warehouse, the levels do show signs of effort when it comes to environmental storytelling and design. The textures aren't terrible for a 2003 release, and there are moments where you can see that the developers actually cared about creating spaces that felt somewhat lived in and were true to the action-packed world of the Angels. Of course, this effort is somewhat wasted given the game's myriad of other faults, but it does give players a rare moment to pause and appreciate that there was, at some point, an attempt to make the game visually interesting. If only the same level of care had gone into the mechanics and controls. It's hard to play Charlie's Angels without feeling like it was at some level trying to capitalize on the success of earlier, better action games. Lara Croft Tomb Raider, for instance, with its emphasis on female protagonists, exploration and combat, seems like an obvious influence. However, Tomb Raider was a polished, innovative game. for the time and redefined its genre, whereas Charlie's Angels feels like a clunky, inept knockoff. You can also draw comparisons to The Bouncer, Squaresoft's action-packed beat-em-up from 2000. However, where The Bouncer had fluid combat and decent character design, Charlie's Angels just can't keep up. Its shallow gameplay loops feel like they were trying to mimic these predecessors, but without any of the finesse or understanding of what made those games work. Perhaps the most infamous section of the game, and the one that has gained a kind of a cult status itself in gaming history, is the ladder climbing sequence in one level. In this particular level, the player is forced to climb a ladder. So far, so good. For over a minute. The character's slow ascent feels torturous, with nothing happening in the background and no enemies to fight. It's just your angel slowly moving upwards, an exercise in tedium that makes the entire game come to a complete halt. This bizarre design choice has gone down in gaming infamy. It's a moment so bad it becomes almost comical. It's a sequence emblematic of the kind of thoughtless padding that plagues the entire game. Why have a ladder so long that takes over a minute to climb? Why not have a loading screen instead? Why was this included in the final product? We may never know, but it adds to the unique charm of this game, if you can call it that. Despite all of these issues, broken camera, dull combat, poor hit detection, infamous ladder sequences, there's something strangely endearing about Charlie's Angels. This isn't a mediocre game where the developers didn't try at all. No, there's a clear sense that effort was put in. It's just that the execution is so tragically flawed that the result is fascinating in its failure, rather than admirable. The ability to switch between the angels mid-level shows that someone at some point had grander ambitions for this game. Each angel has her own voice lines and slightly different combat moves, which suggests developers didn't simply slap something together. But these small glimpses of effort are buried underneath a mountain of bad design choices. There's a certain charm to how bad the game is. It's not the kind of bad where you get frustrated and give up, although some might. It's the kind of bad where you laugh, shake your head, and keep going, just to see what ridiculous thing the game will throw at you next. In that way, Charlie's Angels has earned a kind of cult following. It's the game equivalent of a so bad it's good movie, if you will. Gamers return to it not to enjoy a quality experience, but to marvel at how something this broken was released to the public. In the grand scheme of gaming history, Charlie's Angels for the PS2 stands out as a legendary failure. It's not the worst game ever made, but it's certainly among the most memorable for how badly it misses the mark, with its awkward camera, repetitive and unsatisfying combat, puzzling design decisions, and infamous ladder climbing sequence. Still can't get over that. It should be a game to avoid. Yet, for those who appreciate gaming oddities, it's worth experiencing just to see how much you can go wrong with a licensed tie-in. In the end, Charlie's Angels is a game that's impossible to forget, even if it's for all the wrong reasons.